Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. You know, it's funny, we find our guests from various walks of life, political, social, in business, entrepreneurial, religious, local versus national versus state issues. They come to us from our existing guests. They come to us from other referrals nationwide. I am very proud today to do a deep dive with a new friend I've met. His name is Peter Del Rosso. He is involved for several years, decades, in issues of various levels of Homeland Security throughout this nation. And we're going to go all the way back to prior to 9/11. We're going to discuss Peter's background, and we're going to do a deep dive on how national security has changed and his personal experiences with taking direct fire from the enemy at the border. And we're also going to talk about the status of our Homeland Security system, immigration, and where he sees it's going. Peter Del Rosso with us on Homeland Security right after this.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our biggest Christmas sale ever. You get our brand new 6-piece My Towels for only $29.98, or rejuvenate your bed with a MyPillow mattress topper as low as $99.99. Or how about MyPillow bed sheets for as low as $24.98? There's something for everyone. Duvets, quilts, down comforters, body pillows, bolster pillows, and so much more. Well, I know MyPillow products make for the perfect Christmas gifts, so I'm going to extend my money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2024. So go to MyPillow.com now or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get huge discounts on all MyPillow products. For example, you get our 6-piece towels for only $29.98. Or get your very own MyPillow bed sheets for as low as $24.98. It's our biggest Christmas sale ever. Get all your shopping done now while quantities last.
Hi, friends, and welcome back to our Grassroots Truthcast. Today, my guest is going to be Peter Del Rosso from Homeland Security. Well, he's retired now, but Peter, welcome to our show today. It's glad to have you.
It's a pleasure.
Your background is most fascinating. I appreciate the referral from friends who both have been with us on the show and people in the community who know of your background that brought you to Grassroots Truthcast. Folks, we're going to spend as much time as we want. I suspect it's going to be around an hour. I'd like to get into a deep dive with you, but instead of me boasting about you, why don't you boast about yourself? Where were you born? Where'd you go to school? How did you end up in 30 years plus with the federal government on security?
So I was actually born in a town called Bayonne, New Jersey, not far from New York City. I was born in 1966. Anyway, I grew up there.
Old-timer.
My parents were immigrants, Italian, first generation. They came to this country, and my dad was a businessman. He owned a couple of restaurants back in the New Jersey area. My mom actually followed, and she became a business owner as well with my dad.
Were your parents first-generation Americans?
My parents were first-generation Italian, and they became American. They naturalized in this country.
Oh,
the both of them. Yes.
So you have just as a footnote, you have an appreciation for this immigration process.
I do, absolutely.
I'd like to hear you talk about how they went through an immigration process versus the immigration process we're dealing with now, but we'll save that for later. Go ahead.
Sure. So anyway, I was actually born into the business. My parents worked. When I was 5 years old, my parents both put me to work. I was washing dishes and working in a restaurant, helping whatever I can, and that's how I grew up. A little later, my dad passed away. He passed away in 1981, and my mom couldn't hold the businesses anymore, so she ended up selling the businesses, and we kind of got out of that because she was by herself. She never remarried. My mom died during COVID.
Oh, my.
Yep.
Because of COVID or during COVID?
Because of COVID. She died in one of the nursing homes.
Was this the Governor Como issue of allowing COVID infected people back into the nursing homes?
We were in New Jersey at the time, so it was under Governor Murphy,
Same story.
which yeah, basically succeeded.
This wasn't the topic for today's discussion, but since you brought it up, COVID infected patients ended up back in a nursing home with where your mother was, and she died of COVID?
She did. Yes.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. There's a whole nother story that I didn't expect us to be talking about, but that to me is one of the biggest egregious acts this nation has suffered from, aside from the border being overridden. So let's come back to that sometime in the future. Will. Okay. Continue with your thought. I know you you got your degree in criminal justice.
So in 1985, I actually decided to go into the military after I graduated high school. And I always wanted to be in the military. It's something that I always honored, and I loved the guys in the uniform, and I respected the people and the military. It was something that I wanted to do my whole life growing up.
How many years?
That I was in the military?
Yeah.
So I went in 1985, and right after Desert Storm is when I got out, and I went into the reserves shortly thereafter and was honorably discharged in November of 1993.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service. It isn't said often enough, and I appreciate what you and thousands of folks like you who still have that American spirit of patriotism in your bloodstream.
Till this day, I still do.
God bless you, and I'm glad. Today, you were working soon after as a field agent.
So my career, once I got out of the military, I wanted to continue. I wanted to be in law enforcement, and I decided to join local sheriff's department where I lived. So I was briefly sheriff's officer, and from there I ended up running into a friend of mine who I was in the military with, and he had asked me, he says, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to continue into law enforcement. I want to do my job. I mean, I love law enforcement. He's like, well, why don't you come on and be a federal agent with us?
Just like that.
You can work with the Department of Justice. And he was working for immigration at the time. So I met him later at the gym, and he ends up coming, and at that time we didn't have any computers, so he hands me an application. Says, here, fill this out. So I filled it out, and I brought it back to him. And he goes and hands it in for me, submits the application. About 3 weeks later, I get a call from the director of immigration in New York City, and says, Mr. Del Rosso, are you still interested in a position with the U.S. Department of Justice? I said to him, absolutely I am.
What year was that?
So that was back right after Desert Storm. That was like around 91.
Okay.
Yep, right after that. Anyway, so I continued, and I was hired. I went into the office, and they swore me in, and they sent me to the academy. I attended the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. Came out, and I worked in New York, in New York City, approximately 7 years, from 91 all the way to 97. At that point, I transferred to the New Jersey field office. Still continued to work for the Department of Justice. But moving back a little bit, since I got hired, I want to tell the folks some of the things that I actually experienced, some of the cases that I've actually worked on.
Yeah.
I want to bring that to light, just kind of share it with everyone.
Well, was that part of your assignment in immigration enforcement?
So I was an agent.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting cases that I worked on, a couple of them, back in 1993, when we had the first World Trade Center bombing, that they attempted to take World Trade Center down, not taking any credit for it, but when they arrested the blind sheikh, I was involved in in that case there.
That's 1993.
1993.
It's about 8 years before 9/11.
Yes, that was February of 1993.
Wow. And what was your role in that?
So I was an agent. I was one of the arresting agents and was involved with the, with that case and going in with the blind shake and,
Up to that point in your experience in immigration, had you seen, would you say the amount of illegals and terrorists in this country was pervasive in the thousands, in the scores, maybe 20, 40, 60, or 80? Or would you say we had terrorists running around in the thousands?
So at the time, we had an influx of a lot of males that were Arabic descent coming into the country.
What year?
And that was back around 1993, 92.
Oh, my words.
Yes.
That's almost 8 years before
Correct.
9/11.
There was a huge influx of these Arabic males coming into the United States. A lot of them were coming in under F1 visa, which was a student visa. That's how they were entering the country.
And what was your role up to that point in time? Were you just identifying them, or were you arresting them?
So at that time, I was immigration enforcement at the time. So we had a fugitive operations unit, and we were working our cases just like normal. People who entered the country, they were here illegally. So we'd have a case in front of us, and we'd go out and we would find this person, or cases that we were assigned, and we would go out and pick them up and bring them back, and we would detain them, and then they would go through a process, legal process.
Now, this is before what I would say immigration and law enforcement related to the incarceration and charging of wrongdoers.
Correct.
This is early ICE.
Early ICE, which was immigration at the time. We were immigration enforcement at the time.
Were you arresting, or were you then taking them back to their homeland?
So we were arresting them. We had majority of them. We had two different types of warrants. So we had administrative warrants and we had criminal warrants, and we also picked up people on Interpol warrants as well, which was international warrants. So those were the warrants that we would usually pick the people up on.
What were they being picked up on for?
So a majority of them were, if they were under administrative warrants, they would come in on what they call a B1 or a B2 visa. A B1 or a B2 visa means that you would be able to stay in this country 6 months to 1 year, and then you would have to go back. Well, a lot of these people would obtain these visas, these B1, B2 visas, and they would overstay their visa, and then they wouldn't go back. They would just come here, stay here, and never report back.
Were these people of Arabian or Muslim descent? Were they suspicious?
So these people that were coming in were from all over the world, every single nationality.
What you're saying to me is before 9/11, there was the perpetration of illegal immigration, which seems to be, from what you're saying, much worse than we even knew of it to be.
Correct. So what happened was a lot of these people, and when Europe opened up they had open borders. Obviously, we know when that started, way back 30 years ago.
Right.
Plus, what they were doing is they were going to Europe because it was very simple for them to go into Europe, and they would obtain citizenship, let's say, in the UK. Let's say someone from Africa would go to the UK and they would obtain citizenship there, as an example. Well, now they get a passport saying they were living in the UK, and then what they would do, let's say they wanted to come in here to the United States because the UK was part of an international agreement that we had. It was a treaty, and they had what they called visa waiver pilot programs at the time, and they still do till this day. It's a VWPP program. And there was approximately 22 countries signed up for this program. The UK, all the European, Italy, France, of course. And basically anybody under this program would be able to come into this country without a visa and be able to stay here for 90 days. Visit their family, conduct their little business, and then they would go back without a visa. So that's how these people were coming in, but they started to abuse the system. The people that were going from other countries that wanted to do harm here in the United States started to use that system. So they would become...
Started to use the system
They
to
started
bring
to
their
use-
family in or to bring in other terrorists.
bring themselves if they were terrorists. Some of them were, and some of them were legitimately coming here. But if you could see a hole in the system, something that's not, that you can use and take advantage of, criminal element would see that, and they would use that program. Let's say, hey, you know what? I could go in there under the VWPP program, which is a visa waiver. I don't need a visa, so I could just go in there, use that, and never go back. I would be undetected.
And now you're employed within the United States, either with your own business or you're working for an employer
A
with your
majority
own,
of them would do that.
with their own social security number.
They would get a social security number. Yep.
Of those
apply.
people, I'm talking pre-9/11.
Pre-9/11.
Pre-9/11, 2001, pre-9/11. How pervasive was it? Hundreds, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands?
I would definitely say in the hundreds of thousands, yeah. They were coming in. And we had, Chinese. There was lots of Chinese coming into the country. I mean, people from all over. I mean, international. I mean, we dealt with people from everywhere, obviously.
Okay.
But they did have time periods where you had influxes of people coming in. So let's say we had an influx of Chinese, which was in 1993. There was another case that we had, which was the Golden Venture. Golden Venture. The Golden Venture was a barge, a ship, that actually came in from China. And they had Chinese nationals on board.
Came in where? To New York?
Came into New York. The ship actually landed in Queens, New York.
Oh my.
And they had, it was, when we got called that Sunday, I'll never forget, it was on a Sunday, we got called up to respond to this. Ship came into New York and loaded with Chinese nationals. We went in there, opened a barge up. Down below, there was hundreds of Chinese migrants that were being transported here to the United States for slave trade.
For slave trade?
Slave trade.
You opened up the hatch and what did you see?
There was feces everywhere, pee everywhere. They were eating each other's food. I mean, there was garbage everywhere. It was disgusting. It was just something the normal person wouldn't want to deal with.
Or understand.
Yeah. So a lot of these people coming in were being used for prostitution. They were being used to work in the sweatshops.
Now, time out. That's in the early 90s.
In the early 90s.
We're not even up to 9/11 yet.
Not even up to 9/11 yet.
Just a time out from my point of view, I moved from Connecticut to Pensacola in 1992. My big debut to a national crisis was the Twin Tower crash and the 9/11 and then the Pentagon and then the hijacking of the other aircraft. That was 9/11. But you're talking about incidences going back 10 years prior.
Correct.
Would you say, from your experience, from your intelligence with the government, that this was, to the extent to which you can disclose, was this a perpetration of a conspiracy initiated by Russia, China? Was this the Islamic groups, ISIS or the Islamic Jihad? Osama bin Laden had actually made an attempt almost a decade prior to 9/11 on some of the stuff you're talking about in New York City.
So obviously we all know Desert Storm.
You were in Desert Storm.
I was in Desert Storm, and it started prior to that, obviously.
What role did bin Laden have in that earlier event?
My knowledge, I mean, being in the military, he wasn't talked about much.
Who was one of the leading terrorists at the time running these subversive groups?
So Saddam Hussein actually was the main guy that they were actually portraying as a terrorist. And that's the person in the military. We received our orders, and it's like, this is who we're going after. This is where we're going. This is what we're doing. So each unit had a mission.
Each of the units. That's one thing I wanted to get to.
Yes.
We're going to jump ahead. This is fascinating, folks, because I'm here with Peter Del Rosso, who's got a pretty extensive background for decades with and through the Department of Homeland Security. And initially, ICE. I'd like to have you talk about how ICE morphed into with the other agencies in a minute. But let's stay on the timeline. This is great. What happened to those? Let's go back to the Chinese ship with the hundreds of people down.
The Golden Venture.
The Golden Venture. What happened to the people? What happened to the captain?
So most of the people that we ended up taking into custody, we had to process these people. They were detained for a while. And the reason why we had to do that was because we had to find families for them, people who would actually take them in. They would have to be credible, showing, that they could support. And some of these people had deportation hearings to send them back. So there was multiple.
This was a policy of immigration.
That was an immigration policy. So they would go under their own. Everybody was, if they got out, per se, then there was a hearing set up for them. And what happened after that, I don't know, to each individual. I mean, there was hundreds of them.
Footnote, the immigration policy today refuses to address the fact that if such a wave of immigrants, illegal immigrants, are coming into the nation, that they would use a policy back in the 1990s to get basically a sponsor, an American sponsor, to get behind and support this immigrant, regardless of their status.
Correct.
To control and manage the ability of the United States Customs and State Department and Immigration to decide if that person's getting booted out and going back home, or if they could legitimize themselves in becoming a citizen. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. That whole policy and process seemed to have melted away, especially more recently.
Under the Biden administration, it most definitely has.
Let's come to that.
We will.
Okay. What happened to the captain of the Chinese ship?
So the captain and his mate, both of them were charged with smuggling, and both of them did serve time. Once they served their time, then they would come back and they would go through their deportation proceedings after they served their time.
Peter, you're in ICE at the time, and you're headquartered somewhere in New Jersey or New York, right?
I was in New York till 1997, and then I transferred to the New Jersey field office, yes.
You saw all of this.
I did.
You were training and educating the consolidation which was about to occur in the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and these agencies coming together, which happened soon after 9/11. But you had a front row seat to the movie.
I did, for sure.
How many of these people got away with murder?
Thousands.
Where have I been? I haven't seen this in the news.
Then they wouldn't put it in the news.
Why? Guys like you working could have talked about that.
Could have, but at the time everything was classified.
You had your top secret clearance?
I do.
Were you working for an agency that mandated you not talk about it?
We're under our policy, we're not supposed to talk about.
But America was being undermined.
Correct.
I mean, this isn't about two planes hitting the Twin Tower and a few other related incidents.
Correct.
This is about thousands of people 9 years before 9/11.
And probably even before that, a generation before that, as far as I can. Yeah.
If you were an elected official, I'm jumping on you. If you were an elected official in Congress, what would you do to it? What law would you want to see in place to protect immigration and the citizenship of this nation?
All the laws are in place already. We don't need to make any more laws. We don't need to change any laws. We need to take the laws that are on the book currently and start using them the way they need to be used.
Bravo. I happen to agree with you. In fact, we need fewer laws, not more laws.
Correct.
But they're not being followed.
they're not being followed.
Now, let me jump on you again. There's a guy by the name of Tom Homan went through the ranks like you did and went all the way up the political side of it to become assistant deputy director of ICE and Homeland Security. What does a guy like him do? Did he look the other way?
I know Tom Homan, and I'll tell you what, I would work for that man anytime, any day of the week. If he were to ever go back and ask me to come and work for him, I would definitely work for him.
Folks, last week we had on the show Jason Jones, who went to the border in the last 3 or 4 years, and he was serving in a different capacity, going after some of these coyotes on a case-by-case basis. I'm not sure if it was for Homeland Security or ICE, but it doesn't matter. He said the same thing you did. He knew Tom Homan, and he thinks the guy walks on water.
Tom Homan, he's the type of guy who went through the ranks. He was with his officers, his agents, and if it was time to go out in the field and get your hands dirty, he was the guy who would be leading the charge. That's the type of guy that Tom is.
I see in his expression when interviewed on the various networks a total sense of frustration. The man is totally, in fact, I don't know where he gets his stamina from.
We're all frustrated the same way. We're the guys who went through the ranks. Tom went through the ranks just like I did. You know, he started back in the early 90s. I mean, he has a very extensive career. Supervisor and became the director.
Interesting. Excellent. Folks, we're talking with Peter Del Rosso. You know, he's had assignments that have included immigration enforcement and protecting the homeland of this nation from terror threats from all over the world. And I find it interesting that you were also assigned to the Fugitive Operations Unit in high-risk environments and served as team leader on these missions during the global war on terror. That jumps ahead after 9/11.
After 9/11.
Let's take a break at this point. We're talking with Peter Del Rosso, a very interesting person who served in a few different roles under a total career of over 30 years with the Department of Homeland Security. And he has different chapters that we've come to identify in his career path here that are worthy. The best is yet to come. We've got a few more to share with you right after this. Hi, everybody. Gene Valentino, founder of Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. This segment is the opening segment of 11 segments to follow. The 11 segments will be each of the amendments to the Second Bill of Rights to the Constitution of the United States, which I've written as suggestions to improve the governing democracy, the democratic republic in which we live and work today. You know, the Constitution of the United States is a document written to protect the people from the overreaching government power, the overreaching government hand, and it's supposed to be able to unite people based on respect and individual liberty and freedom. It presumes that our government is one that succeeds, that governs less, not governs more, meaning of the people, by the people, and for the people. The republic, which is why we call it a democratic republic, has more to do with the concept of a decentralized form of government. In fact, in the early days, our founding fathers reached out to the different states of the nation in just that way and asked them to sign on to this thing called the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution. And to do so, it was a way of gathering the many together of different cultures, different religions, different ways of life, and asked them to form one united America. It was a difficult challenge, but one that worked and has worked longer and better than any other governance in this world. But over the decades, over the 2 centuries, and more so recently, we've seen an acceleration of dysfunction, bad behavior, deceit, treachery, and abuse of that beautiful democratic process. And for that reason, I've proposed this second Bill of Rights. This second Bill of Rights complements the first Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and the 17 more. A total of 27 amendments to the Constitution exist today. This Bill of Rights I propose is the second Bill of Rights, 11 more amendments to the Constitution. I'd like you to sit back and join me. Take one or two of these in sequence. Obviously, you'll find them on the website, which is where you've seen this, www.genevalentino.com, the second Bill of Rights on the top tab toolbar of the website. The first one and the other 11 will follow. Stay tuned. Hi, folks, and welcome back to the second half of our episode with Peter Del Rosa. Came out of Homeland Security and has so many different chapters of interesting experiences over the last 30, 35 years that he's sharing with us. It's not just about the border encroachment on the southern border today, but really an overview of the lack of good administration we've seen in the protection of this nation. You know, a good nation has good borders, and the deterioration of these borders over the last few decades, has evidenced itself. But my words, this guest of mine with me today, Peter Del Rosa, has revealed some things that I think are factual and are also insightful. And so let's continue the conversation. Thank you for being with us. Before we get to 9/11, Peter, what was your day like under ICE?
So before 9/11, we were actually immigration under Department of Justice. That's what we fell on, post 9/11.
Okay.
So I would go into the office, we'd have our cases. Our administration allowed us to handle our own cases, basically treated us like adults. You know, this is your job, this is what you got to do, you know what you need to do, go ahead and work it. And I could work as many cases as I want during my work week, you know, and I did. I mean, we all did.
Did your family suffer?
So at one point, my family did suffer because the first couple of years of my marriage, I was never home. I was always working.
Why?
Because I wanted to do better for this country. Once you start getting involved in these cases, it almost becomes part of you, part of your life. I spent more time at work than I did at home.
Did you actually get face to face with the enemy and take on gunfire?
Every day. Well, gunfire, I mean, not gunfire per se, but I've had a couple of incidences in my career. But as far as putting hands on and arresting these people, yes, it was every day. And, you know, you don't know who you're going up against. So whoever whether it's a 80-year-old little lady or if it's a little, 18-year-old little boy that's coming through the border, I mean, there's always a chance that something can happen, right?
Yeah.
So you're putting hands on these people, and some of these people, they want to fight. So you'd have to fight.
So I moved down to Pensacola, Florida in 1992, and I'm listening to this last 9 years prior to 9/11 that you're just referring to. My wife and I watched on the news daily the 10 years prior to 9/11. And I remember being at my home in the morning when the TV just happened to be on. I was watching the commercial airlines go into the Twin Towers.
Yes.
It was almost as if it was a movie in surreal. Where were you when that happened?
I was with my partner. We actually went that morning to pick up a prisoner that we arrested. We were working a case, and we were going to bring this gentleman up to the U.S. Attorney's office. That's what our mission was.
Downtown Manhattan.
For that day, right. So we were going into New York. We were sitting on Pearl Street, and it was almost 9 o'clock in the morning. And we looked up and saw a plane hit the building. hit the world.
Pearl Street's right next to the Twin Towers.
Right next to the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
I looked up and I turned around to my partner and I said, something just came and I said, we're getting hit. And he turned around to me and said, what the fuck are you talking about? I said, dude, we're fucking getting hit. Just like that.
What happened?
That was a conversation.
Where were you?
We were sitting in a car on Pearl Street. And we were amazed when the plane hit it. For a second, it's like, did the plane just crash into the building? And something told me we were getting hit. I felt it.
Well, minutes later, the second one.
So minutes later, the second one went. And he turned around to me. He said, dude, you're fucking right. Just like that. That's exactly what he said, word for word.
And what happened? What'd you do?
So with the prisoner we had in the car, I said, well, we have to make a decision now. I said, let's take this guy. Let's bring him over to the MCC over in Manhattan, Lower
MCC
Manhattan,
is
which is the Federal Detention Center over in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. So I called the office and I told them what we were doing.
Wait a minute. Isn't that where Epstein was kept?
It was.
Okay. Keep
Absolutely. So we brought him over there. They took him. And at that time, we ended up responding to the World Trade Center when it came down.
So you were on some sort of a group channel frequency?
So we ended up turning our radio on, and we had what we call SPEN channels. SPEN channels is a state police network. And basically, it integrates all the different law enforcement agencies. It integrated Port Authority, New York City Police Department, and integrated all the police departments in the area. And they were screaming on the radio. They needed all available emergency personnel to respond to the World Trade Center at the time. We were there. We were available emergency personnel.
You were there under the auspices of ICE or Homeland Security?
We were there under Immigration Department of Justice at the time.
At that time?
At that time.
Because it hadn't merged yet?
Correct.
So under Immigration Department of Justice, you were heading some 200 to 400 people, weren't you, in your network?
So at that time, no, not yet.
Okay.
Not at that time. That was under Homeland Security.
So you and your partner were on your own?
We were on our own.
And what'd you do?
So we responded to the World Trade Center, and we assisted with the rescues.
Did you pull any people out of the...
we did.
Out of the subways?
We did. We went out there, and there was rubble, there was fires everywhere, there was dead bodies everywhere. You know what? I mean, if you pull a brick, take a brick and pull it off, and you think you're rescuing a body, and you might pull a hand out. You know, I mean, and that was all that was left. I mean, people disintegrated. There was burning paper everywhere, fires everywhere. It was just, you know.
That was at around 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning Eastern time. What happened? That was a pretty long day for you.
It was. We never ended up going home. So I remember just hearing they grounded all the planes, they grounded everything, all traffic.
That's
stopped. Right. And I remember we were there even that night. And, you know, I mean, people have been to New York City and that whole area. It was full of life. And that night, you could literally hear a pin drop. Everybody was just quiet and working just to rescue people.
So where were you working? Let's get more specific. Were you specifically at the crash site of the Twin Towers?
I was, yes.
And what were you doing?
So we were there. We were assisting with the rescues and helping to rescue people and pulling bodies out of rubble.
Well, the gear you see on TV, even the firefighters had masks and different things. Their bodies were covered in some soot.
We were covered with soot, yes.
Did you have any protection?
We had respirators that they handed us, and we did what we did. I mean, just threw on your work gloves. And
do you have a sense during the day of how many people you recovered, living or dead?
There was lots, probably hundreds.
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 In your that you were exposed to.
Yes, with the time that I assisted.
Go ahead, keep going.
So anyway, at that time, things started to come under control. So more of the fire department and the rescuers that were there, and they ended up pulling us off, and finally they gave us a mission, immigration, because immigration, once they started to figure out what happened and terrorists, and obviously that's what it had to do with, was immigration, because these people were here on F1 visas, which was student visas. They came in here.
These people, the terrorists?
Terrorists came in as students. They were here studying as students. They were all here on F1 visas. Yep, as a student.
Did you arrest any of the original terrorists?
So, no. So what happened was the FBI and the Central Intelligence Agency did not want to share information with our agencies. There was everyone wanted to keep their own little
Kingdom.
secret. Right,
Yeah.
Correct. So eventually the president got involved, and they were talking, and this was above my pay grade, I mean all up above, and they came to an agreement where the FBI and the CIA started to share information with the Immigration Service.
Yeah, let me jump in there. That was during the Patriot Act. And
it was prior
to the Patriot Act. Well, they started sharing it, but I think the initiative under presidential order was a mandate from him that you will consolidate your information.
You're going to consolidate your information so that way we could do our job and go out there and grab these people. Because immigration at the time was the only ones that were really authorized to enforce immigration law. That was what we did.
Yeah.
Right? That's our expertise. That was our database. You know, we just need the names of these people, get the information that we need so we can go out there and get them.
Did you?
We did.
Go into it as far as you can.
So I can't go all the way into it, but we've arrested in the New York, New Jersey area and metropolitan area a substantial amount of suspected terrorists.
20s, hundreds, thousands?
It was a lot. I'll just put it to you that way.
Well, a lot to me in this environment would be over 1,000.
Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Holy schmoly.
And that was probably between 2001 and 2003.
So the Patriot Act hadn't been instituted yet, but but the president had demanded a consolidation of the agency information. I know when I came into my job as a county commissioner decades later that there was a mandate as a result of 9/11 that mandated that the agencies all glue their databases together so you're working off the same sheet.
Right. So the Patriot Act, and the reason why that came about was because a lot of these suspected terrorists that were coming in all started to open businesses, because what they needed to do was they needed to get money back to their organization, and they needed to fund their cause.
Do you find that these thousands of people you arrested were more interested in becoming Americans, or were they more interested in taking down America?
They were interested in taking down America for sure.
Were they Islamic and Muslim?
Yes, they were.
100%, 90%?
100%.
Where was China at the time?
At the time, they were doing their thing. They were just hanging out, watching everything that was going on, but I'm sure they were contributing to the cause.
Well, you were on the front line. You saw who was coming in and who wasn't. Aside from this shipload of people who were being shipped in illegally, most of them were not planned terrorists trying to take down the nation China at the time. It was Muslim and Islamic Jihad and Taliban.
As far as China had a vision. Think of it that way. You're looking at everything that's going on, and now we have a vision.
You mean today is the vision of China from 20 years ago?
Correct.
Okay.
You know, this is where we're going to need to be. And they're out there and they're collecting intelligence.
Let's stay back there because we got a lot more to cover.
Yep.
Okay, so we're still on 9/11.
Yep.
You got burnt out after a few days of working 20-hour days, weren't you?
Oh, it was more than a few days. I was actually away from my family for years. I've actually missed my kids growing up. My son was 5 years old. I was away. I was traveling around the world, working internationally, just away from home all the time. I was never home.
Can I ask? Was there a price to pay? Did it cost you a problem with your family?
It did not. And
You stuck together.
we stuck together.
God bless you.
You know,
That's an unusual family.
my wife took care of my kids. My kids are grown up, doing well today.
Wonderful.
You know,
And now they look back at Dad during an era of this nation and what you did to protect this democracy.
they do. And my son was
You
actually.
should be very proud of that.
I am very proud. My son was born in the year 2000. He actually saw a lot. I mean, he doesn't remember everything going on, but he kind of remembers, you know, through the years.
All right, well, expound a little bit more on what happened around 9/11, 2001, and then let's continue forward.
So after that, we started going out and we started arresting a lot of these people. We started, you know, getting them in. Some of them we had to keep incarcerated here in the United States. Some of them we had to actually bring them back to their country of origin. We were doing a lot of trips to Pakistan, and we were turning them over.
Wait a minute. We were returning terrorists to a homeland,
Correct.
which was an American expense.
Correct.
We did not incarcerate them and imprison them for clear evidence of terrorist act.
Some of them not. Some of them we didn't have a case on. You know, unless
Okay,
they actually committed a terrorist act, you
Yep.
can't charge them with anything.
Okay, my number, thousands of people. What percentage of them would you say were incarceratable and should have been imprisoned? 90% or 10%?
I would say 90%.
And how many really went home?
We had a lot.
90%?
Almost.
50 to 80%?
I would say so. It was a large number.
So we let a lot of criminals walk that did damage to this nation.
Right, because they know that if they come back into this country, it was easier for them to get out and say, okay, well, I'm going to get expulsed out of the country, and it would be easier for them to come back into the country.
Interesting.
You know, let's do it through the southern border.
Okay,
You know,
that's where I'm going.
Right.
That's where I'm going. Before you hit the southern border, talk to me further about the genesis of what happened. Now, we left the Bush administration during 9/11, and we moved into the subsequent administrations. And how did they treat the terrorist movement, and who was running what became truly Homeland Security?
So under the Bush administration, obviously, as everyone saw, you know, they were pushing enforcement. And that's when the Patriot Act, that's when Homeland Security came together, that's when everyone was behind us, that's when all the money was going to Homeland Security to actually what I do want to talk about, I want to talk about Homeland Security a little bit and how it was actually formed.
1993.
No. Homeland Security was formed in February of 2003.
In 2003.
What they did
That's right.
was they ended up putting together immigration, U.S. Customs, Border Patrol,
Okay.
U.S. Secret Service, the Coast Guard, the U.S. Air Marshals, and Federal Protective Service.
And TSA came under that too.
TSA also fell under that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So now they integrated all these agencies together, which gave us approximately 100,000 in manpower. Now what they did was they created, obviously all these people had to be trained, so we had to go back to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center for additional training to become, because the reason behind this was, let's say if the air marshals needed more manpower in the air, so we would be able to assist each other. So we would have our guys detailed to the air marshals, and they would be able to go up there and fly and act as air marshals. If we needed, let's say, for example, Secret Service agents to come and help us, assist us with our cases because we had an overload or an influx at the border or something is going on, we would be able to pull Secret Service from what they're doing and they would be able to come over and assist us, and then vice versa.
And you were working off a new rule book,
Correct.
and your new director of Homeland Security was
Tom Ridge.
Tom Ridge. And this new rule book was the consolidation of administrative rules of these various agencies that morphed into each other.
Correct.
So you had the authority to kind of pick up where the other left off.
Yes.
I'm jumping ahead now. Is that why a border patrol group in Mexico is within the first 25 miles,
So,
and then ICE picks up after that?
right, so under Homeland Security, we have what's called border enforcement, and how they actually organized it was they took the guys like the inspectors, CBP officers that were uniformed, that work at the border. When you come in through a checkpoint, those guys would handle the border. They fell under what they call CBP. Customs and Border Protection.
Customs and Border Protection.
Right. The Border Patrol was not Border Patrol. They're now CBP.
Okay.
Customs and Border Protection. Of course, they're still Border Patrol.
Yeah.
So they would handle everything, let's say, at the front line. So picture the front line at the border, your line. So these guys would be here. Basically, they'll say, okay, an example, you guys will handle everything at the border all the way 20 miles in, from the border 20 miles in. Anything after 20 miles becomes an ICE problem, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Enforcement is a key word. Why? Because we do interior enforcement.
You were on the ICE side.
ICE side.
Did you actually get face-to-face with the criminals?
We did every day of our...
So
That
what
was
was your
regular work.
role? What was your exact role? Were you carrying a gun, or were you actually...
No, I was carrying a gun, yes.
Were you confronting criminals?
We were, yes.
And how many times per day, per week?
Every day.
Every day. You wouldn't see that on the 6 o'clock news.
No.
Why?
And most of our work time was about 60 to 70 hours a week. Be longer than that.
This is before or after you were escorting terrorists back to their homeland?
It was before, during, and after.
So the Border Patrol policies and the immigration rules that were failing and not being enforced, was it because you couldn't do the job, you wouldn't do the job, or you were told not to do the job?
Well, what happened is the administration, how they ended up working, taking it a little bit further under the Obama administration.
Okay, so we went from Bush to
Obama. Right. So at that time, what happened is under his administration, what they were doing was they were defunding programs. So we have funding codes in our programs. So we had what's called, let's say, I'm going to give you some examples. We had a fugitive unit, and then we had a smuggling unit. Those are two units. So let's say they come back and say, you know what? We're going to start to defund the fugitive unit, for example. They're not going to give us as much money the following year, which means we don't have the resources to operate that unit anymore.
What are we talking about, 2001 to 2005?
But that was under the Obama administration, which was probably, we're talking 2008.
All right, we're moving forward. Okay.
We're moving forward.
So defunding of police, in effect, happened a decade before.
So, yeah, so they started to defund our programs. So when they defund our programs, we weren't able to work it because we don't have the money to work it, which means we don't get the vehicles, we don't get the resources, we don't get the officers, we don't get support personnel. So everything gets taken away when they defund.
How are these bastards who are violating law, compromising American security, and trying to perpetrate a fraud against our democracy, how could a guy like you see these bastards face to face? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd make sure they paid a price whether they went to jail or not. How about that for an answer?
I think so.
Huh?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not putting words in your mouth, but you can see how I feel.
Right.
Were you alone with that feeling, or were there others that felt the same way?
No, everybody felt the same way.
Well, when you finally ran out of money to do anything, and found yourself as gatekeepers watching them come over the line, What happened to the moral morality?
Right. The actual agent in the field, they're all great guys. Every single agent out there, they want to do their job. That's not the problem. The problem is the administration. It's up top. They think that they own the government. They think they control everything. And
I hate the word they. You're talking about the elected official at the top.
When I say they, I mean the official that's put into place.
Elected.
Not even elected. These are not elected.
All right, so there would be high-end appointed people.
Correct.
By the elected.
Correct.
Okay.
You know, and these people think they own the government. They do not own the government.
Well, Tom Homan must be the exception then.
Correct. He's one of the exceptions.
Okay.
And there's a lot of good guys in the agency. You know, again, you know, we have to fight the upper administration. This is what they want. Where does that come from? It all comes from the White House. Obviously, they run it. It's got to be them.
That's what I wanted to know.
That's the bottom line to the whole thing.
So what happened, moving toward the Obama administration, what happened prior to Trump?
So prior to Trump, under the Obama administration, obviously he was defunding all of our programs. Every time we tried to work certain cases, certain things had to go through the White House before they could actually get approved for us to actually work.
So it reminds me of the Johnson administration during Vietnam, where everything in Vietnam was running through Johnson.
Correct.
And it was a mismanaged, erratic, circuitous path of policy making.
Correct.
Were you still involved at the Homeland Security at that point?
I was involved in Homeland Security till 2016.
Okay, so you saw it up to Trump.
Correct.
Keep going with Obama then. What happened?
So, you know, as we know, he started to defund all of our programs. He needed to monitor everything that certain cases that we were working had to be monitored through the White House, and he had to give us approval to actually work a certain case. Yes, you can. No, you can't.
Were your colleagues retiring around you?
No. Actually, I was probably in for a long time because I had a pretty long career. And we had a massive hiring spree from like 2000. So when we went into Homeland Security, because we had all the money. So, you know, I had a lot of new guys. The last 10 years of my career, I was actually an instructor. I taught firearms, defensive tactics. I was an instructor for everything. I mean, I taught everything. I was the main guy. And, you know, a lot of the younger kids, they all looked up to me as a mentor. I was mentoring their career, and, you know, I was always keeping everyone safe on the training end of things.
You're retired now. Do you stay in touch with any of them?
I stay in touch with a few of them. I do.
Would you go back in?
So I would go back in if President Trump becomes president and Tom Homan becomes director of Homeland Security again. And if they ever ask me to come back as a contractor, I will be the point on that spear. I will put it to you that way.
Let's make sure they know that. I will do my best to make sure they know that.
You know,
you have, we glossed over the time you served during the Obama administration. You must have, while you were training the newbies coming in, you must have seen a lot of demoralization amongst staff.
And there was, especially after I left, and I did keep in touch with a lot of the people. There was a lot of demoralization. A lot of guys told me, they said, "You're lucky you made the right decision when you got out in 2016. I said, "I did." I said, and I've seen it coming. Because while I was in the government, while I was working there, they would keep you blind to everything else that was going on the outside. And
they keep you in your box, isolated from the total picture.
You're isolated to a lot.
Well, I'd take a friendly disagreement with you on that. I wished you stayed in. I can see how people like you became demoralized, but it was people like you that saved this nation from further destruction. And I wished you had stayed involved. In fact, the opposite's true. Since you think in terms of Trump, I didn't prod you for that answer, but since you obviously support him, it would seem to me that you should have been as aggressive in the Obama administration, which might have cost you. It might have cost you had you been so bold then under Obama, but you certainly would have been someone who would have stood out as a patriot in defending this border. You know, it's like we're putting money into new ideas and new technologies, but many of those technologies on the border existed decades earlier. I remember back in my very early days working for a security company, we had a telettac type of system, which was underground vibrations on fences that created zones of alarm notification. That was long before.
So back in my days, let's just take it back for a minute, being that you just brought that up, I was detailed to the border.
Oh, you were?
I was in Calexico.
Where?
Calexico, just outside of California, San Diego.
Okay.
In that area there. So I'll give you an example. They had sensors on the ground. A lot of them ran through farmland and all the way down into ravines. You don't know if you're in Mexico or you're in the United States in some of these areas because it was so vast. And so some of these ravines went down so deep. So at one point, let's say, and I'll give you an example, a sensor might go off. So you would get a call from dispatch, and they'd say a sensor went off in this area. Okay, a Border Patrol agent will have to go down into that area, but you might be able just to take your vehicle so far. Now you would have to leave your vehicle, and you'd have to trek down into these ravines, and it might take you an hour, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of walking all the way deep down in this forest, right? And now, who knows who you're going to run into? And if you're on one side of the border and you had the Mexicans or the cartel on the other side, on ridge tops, they will actually shoot at you. And this happens every single day to these Border Patrol agents. And I could guarantee you, I've been out of the service for good almost 7 years or so. I could guarantee you till this day it's still happening every day. That's what they have to face every single day. And shooting on the border is a very common thing that happens.
The news broadcasts give you the impression that the Border Patrol folks, they didn't even come inland to ICE yet, but the Border Patrol folks are only there couriering the people through a processing process. I don't get the sense today, not from the 6 o'clock news, that there are people that are actually engaged in combat with people coming over the line.
Right. So right now they actually limited them on the border. So now that we have less people to go and fight that fight. And what they ended up doing is they ended up taking a lot of these guys, and instead of doing their job, which should be border enforcement, and I blame the Biden administration for this, right, for taking them off and wanting open borders. I'm going to give you guys an example. I'm going to give the audience an example.
Please.
Okay? Would you take the door off your house, put a big sign in front of your house and say, anyone who wants to come in and take whatever you want, you can come in my house, it's open. Would you do that? Ask yourself that question.
It's a perfect analogy to what we're experiencing.
Ask yourself that question.
That is a good question.
Would you, I want to ask you now, would you take the doors off your house?
Hell no.
On the road?
Hell no.
Say if you want. Who in their right mind would do that? Because that's exactly what we just did here in the United States. We just opened the door, took the doors off our house, and said, anyone who wants to come in, you can come in, and we're not even going to see who's coming in. And that's exactly what's happening. My opinion is we are going to there are so many terrorists in this country right now that between now and 2024, and you can mark my words, because I hope maybe you'd bring me back after that if we could still come back here, we're going to be attacked. And it's
hold on. That's a significant statement. Based on what you've revealed on this interview today, you've already talked about the thousands that have been infiltrated this nation that have gone undocumented, unreported, and not returned back to their homeland, whether they should have been imprisoned or not. They sit here in the United States as sleepers, sleeper
Absolutely.
cells, terrorists that haven't exposed themselves yet.
Absolutely.
And you're saying there's not a few hundred, there's several thousands,
Thousands.
tens of thousands
Tens of thousands.
of what I would call terrorists sitting silent, awaiting orders from somewhere. And you're saying that by the year 2024, we should see a response from these people?
I believe so. I strongly believe it, and I think that's my opinion.
That's a significant statement
I'll tell you
that I hope reaches the United States Congress, because I don't believe the president has the cognition to interpret the seriousness of that.
I've dealt with these people coming in about almost 30 years of my life. I've done this job for almost 30 years of my life. I should know a little something, right?
Absolutely.
You know? I mean, I think I learned a little bit of something, and I've been through those different stages in my career. When you see Chinese nationals between the ages of 17, 18, 25 coming across our border, that's got to tell you something. That means you're in fighting shape. That means you're in war fighting shape. Look at these guys that are coming through. You can actually see these people coming across the border. I just watched the news, and they actually showed a glimpse of these people crossing the border, Chinese nationals. What does that tell you?
Do you have any insight as to whether this is a bait and switch trick on the United States' part? Can I give America some credit and suggest that maybe we're documenting these wrongdoers, these suspects, through our AI technology, through camera and character recognition equipment, that maybe we're documenting to create a bigger sting, setting up for a bigger response from America against these this potential perpetration?
If you let these people into this country, you're failing to do your job.
Well, I agree with that. We already did, didn't we? We let them over the line.
They're here.
They're here.
They're here.
Okay, so to your first point, we have not protected our borders.
You're not protecting the border. We're not.
Folks, on our podcasts and our radio interview on WMXI, you've heard me talk about Gene's second Bill of Rights, and one of the 11 amendments that I propose through this second Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution specifically addresses by amendment to the Constitution, thereby giving credence to the importance of an amendment, a law of this nation that mandates we protect our borders first. It has to start there. We're a humble, we're a very generous nation, we're a very giving nation. The Monroe Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, going back to toward World War II, all these things we've done as a nation to protect others. But what are we doing to protect ourselves? And if I can extend to that, Peter, what is the rest of the world doing to support the protection of America? We really don't ask for other nations' support, but shouldn't we?
The rest of the world isn't doing anything. They're just standing by with their hands out, waiting for us to hand them money. Yeah. That's what they're doing. They're not doing anything. The United States is the head of everything. They are the spear. We actually held the world together. This nation held the entire world. Just picture, we are the spine of the world. And now, with the administration that actually took over, and all the work that we ended up doing, all these agents, all these law enforcement officers that were out there trying to protect the country, they ripped it apart.
In just one election year.
In one election year, they ripped it apart, and we all saw that. What happened in Afghanistan, which is a total debacle. It shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
You know, and right there, and when they come on the news, and a lot of these, the White House, and they'll come on there and they'll put on a good show for you, and they come on there with these faces saying, well, we really don't know no, you do know what's going on.
Yeah.
And a lot of it that they're doing is intentional. They know exactly what they're doing.
Peter Del Rosso, we're out of time. Would you promise to come back and do a follow-up with me? God forbid I need you to articulate these terrorists evidencing themselves in 2024, as you said earlier.
Absolutely.
You have a personal invitation from me to come back to Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast for another episode. We've run out of time today. Folks, this is Peter Del Russo. He's retired now, but had decades of firsthand experience on border security, immigration, all aspects of Homeland Security. We were very proud to have you with us today. We have opened Pandora's box on so many issues, and folks, we're getting it from the source who experienced it firsthand on many levels that you won't see on the 6 o'clock news. I'm proud to have you here with me today, and I'm proud to have you here with me today, too. Gene Valentino here on Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. Join us again for another episode.
Thanks for joining us for Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and God bless America.